Hello again. Welcome back to China Manufacturing Decoded. I'm Adrian, and Renaud's with me this week again. Hi, Renaud.
Hey, hi, Adrian, and hi to the listeners. Yeah, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I hope you're doing okay, and everybody listening too.
Yeah.
So today's topic is a really great one. You're going to take us through 9 ways that importers can save money. And who doesn't like saving money, right?
Yes, right. Just before that, a word. We got some reaction from people after we wrote about what happened to Kate, and it was the previous episode here, sort of as a bonus. It was published. So if you have subscribed to this podcast, it's probably the one just before or 2 before this one. I'm not sure, but she actually explained what happened to her when she flew back to China, and they found traces of the virus, even though she was negative, because they have another way of looking at it, and they sent her to some kind of prison hospital, and so on. So yeah, we got some feedback on that. Some people really, wow, maybe it's not time to try and go back to China. Right?
Oh my word, yeah. Scary, even.
Yeah, that was scary, yes.
I've got a lot of time for China, but this sort of stuff, it kind of makes me feel like I don't know if I want to go at the moment, even though I do want to go. So yeah, it's I kind of feel sad, seeing stories like that.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the sad situation. International travel to this part of the world is still not to be taken for granted. Yeah. Anyway.
No. Well, and certainly there are risks involved that,
Right.
If you're a business person and you're planning on traveling to China soon, even if you can, you need to sort of be aware of it may not be as smooth as, say, traveling from the States to France or Germany or whatever. It's there's a lot of extra risks. So that was on a blog post on Sofeast's blog as well. So I'll leave the link in the show notes here. And if you haven't seen it, yeah, definitely check it out. And something to bear in mind if you're planning on traveling to China soon. Oh dear, yeah, it's a good one. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Renaud. So yeah, today's topic: saving money. It's a big one in this day and age, but I mean, look, everybody trying to run a business wants to save money in some way, right? So specifically for importers, and this isn't exclusive to China at all. So we're talking about, people who are manufacturing around the world. There are some great ways to save money. I think you got 9 of them, right?
Yeah, I did at least 9 of them. And my first 2 are actually about avoiding big problems, because that's what can kill a company. That's what can be extremely costly. And number 1 is to avoid big problems on the manufacturing side, right? So if you have a massive quality issue on an entire batch that's worth maybe $100,000 and it's all lost, I mean, right there, this plus all the extra money and time and so on that you put into this batch, it's really just wasted, right? Plus, you might be unable to deliver some of your customers, and you might have a contract with them with some extra penalties in case you don't deliver on time and so on and so forth. Okay. Or maybe you have a massive issue that leads to a delay, and then you have to send it by air. And even if you force your supplier to pay for that, well, in the long run, the manufacturer will make you pay for it in one way or another over time, right? So it's really quite expensive. So, how to avoid it? I'll respond, tongue in cheek. Just work with good manufacturers, because good manufacturers don't tend to create big problems. It is just much it happens way less with them, right? Rather than immature, unstructured manufacturers who just go by the seat of their pants, don't really know what they're doing, don't really try to put any structure in their business, try to make deals and and write the day and see what happens, right? So really, yeah, spend some time picking the right manufacturers. Also, don't try to bring immature products into mass production, because everything might be bad if it's immature, or it might cause some other issues. And that goes back to the new product introduction process that we mentioned a number of times here on this podcast. It is really quite important if you develop new products, or if you rely on your manufacturer to bring new products to market. Well, is it a real product or is it just something that they hacked together as a prototype and then they want to go straight into mass production? And who's going to be the first customer of that? Well, that might be quite costly for that poor first customer. Okay. And there's a number of other things. It's really thinking about the risks here, right? So for example, you ship your products in carton boxes, not on pallets and not in an appropriate way, and they get crushed or something like that. And you have to throw them away after, it's even more painful because you have to throw them away after you've paid the supplier in full, very probably, and you've paid for transportation, and you've paid for import duties and tariffs and all these kind of things. And your customer is already counting on it, or your internal operations, or whoever is the customer, right, for these products. You're waiting for it, and ouch, now it's going to be, maybe if it's retail, it's going to be empty shelves. Ouch. That is very, very painful. And sometimes this is just in an effort to save $100 maybe, or maybe it's a failure from the buyer to specify what actually the manufacturer should do on this point, right? So it's really about taking a risk analysis kind of point of view. Okay, what could go wrong? What could go wrong all along, right? Risk-based thinking, as they say in ISO 9001 now, but really try to think of the risks, what could happen, and really cost you a lot of money. And these are the first thing to work on, because if you avoid big and expensive problems, well, that's like, say, it has the same effect on working a lot on gaining a few efficiencies here, cutting costs here, a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here. And then all of that is wiped out by one big problem. So I would think first, think of the big problems. So number one was avoid big problems on the manufacturing side, on manufacturing and transportation side. Another one is to avoid big problems on the distribution side, bringing it to market, and especially big problems that happen after the products have been delivered to the end consumers or customers. Okay. And there are two very big ones. Well, if you set into places like USA, Canada, Australia, UK, European Union, Japan, and a few other places, and your products are non-compliant, but they're actually regulated, ouch. You might be forced to do a recall, right? And that is extremely expensive. Being forced to do a recall on products is what led a bunch of companies to go bankrupt, because it's so expensive, and then you lose the confidence of your customers. Obviously, you get a bad name for yourself out there, right? This is really no good. And it's not just about looking at the regulations and then saying, okay, this is an electronic product, I sell into the EU. Okay, it's got there's the RED directive under the CE mark and blah, 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 right? Maybe low voltage, and we have to do ROS, and we have to do REACH. Okay, all of that. Well, there's also the general product directive, right? If your product, if the foreseeable use, one of the foreseeable uses of your product might put users at risk, even though no regulation clearly says, this is a problem, there's no like, technical standard, EN71 kind of standard saying, well, this is absolutely not good, like sharp points for, for kids products or something like that. No, you have to also think of all the potential safety related failures, right? Because this can definitely go into a recall. And same thing in the US, right? The CSPC and other regulatory bodies like this will get down on you if you put dangerous products on the market. Okay, so compliance and safety is one thing, and also maybe you have to offer a warranty, or you accept returns, or you sell in a distribution channel that accepts returns. Like Amazon is the worst because a lot of people return on Amazon. The return rates are very high, but if you have a product that just stops working very fast, you're going to get some of them return, and you're going to get some bad reviews and bad comments and so on. Now that is painful in the long term. That's lost sales, and you could say that's expensive. Well, that's a lot of lost profit, right? You could translate that into a cost in a way. But if you offer a warranty, or if you allow people to return, that's a cost. Because that product that you get, if they already opened the package and played with it and so on, people can see that it's already been used. Well, you cannot do anything anymore with it. Maybe you can use it for some testing in-house, but it's nowhere near a new product that is ready to be shipped. Okay. And and if really they just don't work, wow, you would have to set up a rework station and maybe open them and change a component and test it again and so on. And anyway, you need to pick a new one, send it to them, pay for the shipment and all these things. Now all of that together is not cheap. It's not cheap. So that can be extremely expensive. And I remember we wrote a blog post on the Agilian blog about returns, right?
Three actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah, one of them was really like the 5 different types of returns or something like that.
Yeah.
And then the other articles were more about the causes for it and so on, right?
Yeah.
But it would be good to link to them. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just talking to Andrew, who wrote those posts actually today, our reliability guru, and we were just talking about CAPA, so corrective action and preventive actions, and talking about recalls. And I know that you can take action once you're in a situation where you've got unreliable products that have hit the market. But even he made the point that, really you're talking last resorts, and it's almost too late at that point, and often the only option left is a recall. But I mean, how damaging is that? Right.
So if possible, do a voluntary recall, and before you have sold too many of these devices, right? But if it's a forced recall, ouch, if because by law in a lot of places you actually have to declare, okay, there is a safety issue here, to the regulator, and then they will have a procedure for you to follow, right? That's the worst.
Yeah.
So that was point number 2. Point number 3 is think of your products and how they could be re-engineered. And that is often the number one way to save money, to cut costs. And there's really a methodology about it, and there's a number of books about it. Design for manufacturing and assembly. Okay, so if you have maybe you've developed a product, and this is usually more about electromechanical products here. I'm not talking about, apparel or like simple furniture or things like that. But let's say you've developed a product, and I don't know, all the bill of material is $45 US plus another whatever $5 of assembly and packing and so on, and then you have shipping, etc. Well, that that product right here, do you want to just take it as a basis and go for its version 2, right? Because products nowadays don't tend to last forever. There are competitive pressures and so on. So you're planning for your version 2. Maybe it's the right time to rethink it. All right. So for example, try to use more standard parts because it just comes with much fewer issues, and you can often get them for a good price. Try to use fewer parts. So maybe make the molds a bit more complicated, the stamping and so on, whatever it is for the custom parts. Try to get as few parts as possible. Try to combine them as much as possible, and then try to really think of how to assemble the product in a very streamlined manner, in a very simple way. So if people have to, fumble with this little screw and put it here and this, this spring here and a spring here and a spring here and and it's they really have to fumble with their hands and move things laterally and so on into the product. It's very messy. It's going to be slow and it's going to be error prone, which means rework, and which means poor reliability also in the field. That's bad, right? But if people just clock, can kit things together in a very simple way, all of the actions from top to bottom, and way fewer things to put together, well, it's been very well documented, and that's really an excellent way of cutting costs. And there's a great example. People can search for a video about the Pro printer, like professional printer, Pro printer by IBM. And I think we have a page about design for manufacturing and assembly. Maybe we can link to that. And we mentioned that video, but they yes. compare traditional printer takes 3 minutes or 5 minutes of assembly time. Plus, again, there's more ways to get it wrong. So that means inspections that find problems, and some devices have to be put aside, and someone has to rework them and retest them and so on. Right? All of that is very costly. So you redesign this, and they redesigned it, and it could be made instead of 5 minutes of assembly, it went down to, I forget, something like 30 seconds of assembly. Well, if you make a batch of 5,000, it's a lot of time saved in assembly. And that can actually allow you to make it anywhere in the world, right? Because you don't have to necessarily be in an area with very low labor prices. But anyway, I get back to the relocation of manufacturing. But people often don't really think about this, but it's really important. And at the same time, what they call value engineering and value analysis is really to align with what the customers want. And sometimes there's some features that are relatively expensive, but that people don't necessarily value that much, right? So, maybe go with a cheaper and simpler version, and you might sell a lot for the same margin.
In the case of certain large electronics companies, I'm sure an even higher price point.
Right. Yeah, if it comes with a nice feel, nice design, and so on. Yes. Right.
I have a quick question on this. Let's say we've launched our version 1 of a product, and we can see, okay, it's selling, it's as we want it to be. We would already have probably started doing some work on a version 2, and all of this is going to have a overlap as we carry on with the iterations of the product, so over the years or the months. At what point do you think you would be starting to think about re-engineering in terms of finding lower cost yet still effective parts, for example, for the next version of the product?
So if you're talking big companies like Apple or Sony, or that tend to be great new products kind of companies, yes, definitely and especially with products that have a 1 year life cycle, and then there's a new version every year. Yeah, they're doing as you are mentioning, but most smaller companies do not do that. They are thinking of the next device, but they're not really working on the design of the next device in general, right? So when is the time to go with that? I would say when you have sufficient cash flow to get a couple of really smart engineers to look into that and rethink all of this. Because again, it's a very well-established method. There are textbooks about this. There's a lot of engineers that have been trained to design for manufacturing and assembly, but also people with a lot of manufacturing experience will be able to provide a lot of great feedback also and ideas. So it's whenever you can put a team on that, I would say, right?
Yeah, it makes sense.
And when you know that the volumes, sort of justify it, I would say, because it is more engineering work and more, let's say, out of the box kind of engineering work. It's going to take a bit longer to do the design, but yeah, I'm a big proponent for that. It's really great when a team comes to us and says, "Hey, here's the design and here's how it's assembled," and we're like, "Wow, clock is like kitting things together and like a Lego, and even a kid could do that." It's wow, nice, Okay, so this was re-engineering the product, number 3. Number 4 is to work more closely with key suppliers. And especially if you're in one specific sort of industry or vertical, and maybe over the years you've expanded the number of suppliers that you work with, well, maybe you need to work with fewer key suppliers, right? The fewer suppliers and consolidate them and have some, a few key suppliers for the things that you purchase a lot of, right? And that's really the IKEA model. And there was a book about strategic sourcing that came out, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago by someone who was working at IKEA and explained how they do. It's really they work closely with the supplier to understand their cost profile and everything, and then they say, okay, these are the fixed costs, this. Okay, if we increase the volume by 2, then your cost per unit will go down 25% or something, right? And then they try to pump up the volume, as they say, and over time, they actually saw costs going down and going down, right? And this cannot keep going forever, of course, but for a good 20-25 years, they really reap the benefits out of this. Now, there's the opposite, right? Because it's not like there's one strategy that will work for everybody. So point number 5 is to actually use competition in your supply base to put some pressure on your current suppliers and sort of extract better pricing from them, right? And this is what a lot of companies are doing because it's much easier than what I just said before, right? Especially these days. I mean, you go on Alibaba, global sources, and you contact, if you're in a commodity business where there's a bunch of different suppliers and the products or their parts, maybe the key parts for your products are not really differentiated, and you just look for the price for a certain spec, well, in one day you can compare pricing from 200 different suppliers. So it can be really a child's game. It's easy. But yeah, in some cases, some companies have not really done all they can in that regard. So in some cases, that's sort of the low-hanging fruit, right? Because maybe they've been faithful and loyal to a few suppliers that, maybe the owner was feeling that they kind of, they should keep the business with them and not put them under undue pressure or whatever. But then circumstances change, and then you get to go back to that and say, well, guys, we cannot no longer function like this. Sorry. You have to do a little bit more arm length sort of sourcing work, sorry. And you introduce new suppliers that are more competitive and you extract better pricing from everybody. Okay, in the long run, this also doesn't work forever, right? At one point you hit you hit a price and you should not go below that price, because if they're not making any money, at one point they're going to try to find ways to make money even behind your back, and that is not good. Okay, that was point 5. And by the way, if you use a sourcing agent that gets, I don't know, for example, 5% or 8% of what you pay your suppliers, the sourcing agent doesn't have any incentive to do that, right? Because their 5% would be 5% of something smaller. They could put a lot of work into that and actually get paid less. So you can see really the limitations of the model of the commission sourcing agent that supposed to make things much easier for the buyer, yeah. But there's some cases like this where the buyer's interest is actually the opposite of the agent's interest. So don't count on them too much. Okay. The next one is, are you working through intermediaries? Are you buying certain things through trading companies? And these intermediaries, are they actually adding value? If they're adding value and the percentage of markup that they apply makes sense, that's not a problem at all, right? Actually, another point could be, instead of buying direct, you might want to buy through a trading company, because in some cases, trading companies add more value than they cost. And, so for example, they might finance things, right? You might work, I don't know, with a Taiwanese company that has very easy access to financing, and their working capital costs them nearly nothing. So you buy from the factory. Sorry, they buy from the factory, they deliver to you, and you pay them 1 month later. Great. And maybe they really don't take much margin, but your working capital would be much more expensive. So maybe they're saving you money, right? I mean, that's the whole. That's a part of the Foxconn story that people don't really know about, but they get near unlimited financing from the Taiwanese government, indirectly. So,
wow. When
Dell or HP or whoever needs some good terms, they go to Foxconn, right? And others, right? Wistron and others. It's not just Foxconn. So trading companies can actually save you money, but in a lot of cases, what I see is trading companies that are there and the buyer doesn't really know what's going on. They don't have transparency. They never learn about their supply chain and how manufacturing works and so on over time. And it keeps going for years and years and years. Sometimes trading companies making a pretty fat margin, maybe 15% or 20%, while doing very little, because maybe at the beginning they did some work to set up the supply chain, but then after that they just cruise, right? And okay, the products are moving, they're getting sold, the buyer's happy, the manufacturer is okay, and let's keep going, right? But at one point that has to stop. It should not keep going forever, except if they're really like a genius, when setting up the supply chain and managing things. But it's not very often the case. And this is most often we see it with, let's say, Latin countries, for example, that tend to be big on relationships. Maybe Italian companies, Brazilian companies, it's my friend, blah, blah, blah. We have a great relationship. And they never really dare to cut them out. Okay. Well. At one point, the accountants should look into this and ask, what markup are they applying and what value are they providing, right? Because maybe it's better for them to hire a purchaser who knows how to buy directly and how to manage the foreign manufacturers. So that's sometimes it's a very easy sort of low-hanging fruit to cut costs. Okay. The next one, number 7, would be to relocate manufacturing. And a lot of people are thinking about that these days with China because of political instability, but also because of the tariffs from the Trump administration that are really not going away. And so if you sell a large amount of products onto the US market, well, that's got to be expensive, especially if it's the 20-25% tariffs. That's quite a bit, right? So it's really an incentive to look around. But it can also be, it can be motivated just by a desire to cut costs. So China's wages are not exactly low these days, right?
No.
And if there are tariffs on made in China products, wow, well, maybe you should start to buy from India, and maybe it's 5 or 8% more expensive, but you don't have to pay for tariffs, and maybe it's worth it. You're going to save a bit of money. Maybe you should arrange things in Eastern Europe or Turkey. Maybe you should arrange manufacturing maybe in Mexico. There's a lot of places around that might offer a better deal. Now, very often the difficulty is that people just want to be traders, basically. Buy a product, finished product, without really thinking of how it's made, and just reselling it and just focusing on the marketing side, right? So they are marketing and distribution companies. They're definitely not manufacturing companies. They don't want to know anything about manufacturing. Well, in that case, it's going to be harder to get out of China. Okay, which brings me to my point number 8, is that you might want to internalize manufacturing. Do it yourself. That is an enabler to move manufacturing to pretty much any country you would like, right? Now, not many companies obviously can handle that, right? An example, we've been helping a relatively large company that's private equity owned, so they have access to capital if they need. That used to be, they're in the sporting good industry. I cannot be more specific, but sporting goods in Asia, Taiwanese, right? They're very, very present in that. And so they had some of their manufacturing in China, some in Taiwan, all handled by manufacturers, by Taiwanese companies, and maybe some in Vietnam too. And just contract manufacturing, just buying. And these Taiwanese companies were good at making it easy, and then they never really learned how to do manufacturing. They really never learned what it takes to make their product, even their main product. They have an idea, but they don't really know. And they're looking at places in Europe, places in Mexico, which makes sense, but then they need a lot of help. A lot of the process engineering, manufacturing engineering, to plan for the facility and plan for the layout and plan for the processes. If we do something from a white page, how much money is it going to be? What is it? What is going to be involved? How much space do we need? And how long is it going to take to put it in place? How to ramp things up slowly, but to avoid any issues, but not too slowly, right? There's a lot of questions that they have in their minds, and the good news is that there are consultants that help with that. Okay, if you're in that case, contact us, right? So sometimes if you have access to the financing, to the capital to do it, that might be a way to save money, because really you might be buying things that are made in a horrible way, in the old batch and queue way, with very, very long lead times, a lot of working capital use, and so on and so forth. Humongous factories where actually there's no need for that much space, maybe twice the labor that is needed, right? So in that case, it's not about re-engineering the product, which was my point 3, but it's re-engineering the manufacturing process and doing it yourself. Okay, that's a way. Definitely not something for everybody, but if you are deep into a certain type of product and you feel that it's a way maybe to build a competitive advantage, especially if you bring it to an area close to your market, it means much faster lead time, right? So maybe Eastern Europe for Europe, maybe Mexico for the US and Canada. These are great ways maybe to build a competitive advantage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think another example, this is a large company though, Zara, and they do manufacturing way closer to home now.
It was their model originally. Then, yeah, they went over to Asia. I don't know. They kind of diluted their whole model. So I can't really, I don't really know where they are now. But that used to be, that used to be their model, in a bunch of little workshops in Spain. And it was very close to the European markets. And they could bring new styles very fast to the stores, and the competitors could not fight them on that, right? So that's a good example, exactly.
Okay.
And then the last one, because we often get these kinds of questions from our clients, obviously, is how to spend money more wisely on quality inspections, on laboratory testing, on all these sort of recurring costs that, well, you can't really do away with it until you have perfect suppliers. But, overall, if you look at it, per year, well, that might be a lot of money, right? So there's been a bit of a trend with big companies that certify some inspectors working for their suppliers and then letting the suppliers do self-inspections. It's, that's a good approach for the best suppliers, I would say, those that have proven with good performance that they can be relied on, right? And that can be in complement to doing inspection, to sending your inspectors, right? You maybe instead of checking 100% of the shipments, you only check the big shipments, or you come as a surprise from time to time, right? That's one way. Checking earlier. So maybe you do, I don't know, maybe you pay for final inspections and every time it's 3, 4, 5 Mondays or even more. Well, maybe it's better to send someone at the beginning of production, maybe as a first article inspection, and then, validate that things are okay at the start of production, and then just trust your suppliers to keep going the same way. Maybe if you analyze your risks, maybe it's better to spend 1 day of work there than 3 days of work at the end of production, right? That's that. When you check earlier, you can detect issues before they become big issues. And again, it really depends on the profile of your risks, right? Another one is simply to do skip lot inspections instead of checking all of the batches. Maybe only the orders above a certain amount, only for relatively high risk, medium and high risk products maybe, and from medium and high risk suppliers. And then you can do skip lots, as I was mentioning. Maybe if they have better performance, check them less often. Keep it on a random schedule, but basically don't check them 100% of the time, right? And then for laboratory testing, wow, that's a deep topic. For example, you do chemical analysis for certain components that are restricted, basically that are not allowed, and you have 5 different models or 5 different materials. You could check them one by one, and maybe if you ask the testing lab for a quote, they will quote you for testing them one by one. But if you think that probably it's all negative, it's all okay, well, you could just bundle them together basically and have it all tested only once, right? That's an example. Also, reducing the number of materials and colors. If you have a number of different models, I don't know, maybe toys, let's say, and the figurines, maybe they get painted in certain colors. Well, if it's always the exact same material the plastic material, and then it's always the same 4 colors, it's going to be cheaper to test than if it's 20 different colors and a number of materials, right?
Yeah.
It might not be as attractive for the market, but you need to find a sweet spot where it's still acceptable by the market. It doesn't really impact, how well the product is going to sell, right? And there's all kinds of ways to do that. People call it often a reasonable testing plan, right? And are you going to test every batch, or what? What are the risks? How to cover the risks? And maybe you're afraid that the supplier might substitute a key material by a cheaper material. Well, there might be other ways to check that material, right? Maybe the inspector themselves, they can use a magnet to see what kind of metal, if it's that kind of metal or that, aluminum or steel, they can burn a plastic to see how it burns or whether it burns. They can do a number of little things sometimes to confirm that the product was not adjusted to ensure that that everything is still okay, right, as you expect it. So and because chemical analysis is quite expensive. Those are my 9 ways to cut costs. The list could be much longer, but not sure we should go longer than that.
No, this is about an average length of the podcast, I think. So it's a good one. And again, as we said at the top of the show, everybody's going to be eager to cut costs in one way or another. And there's a lot of options there, some completely different to others, like controlling the kind of inspections and testings that you're doing, and maybe cutting back on some where it's appropriate. For example, that's something that you can just immediately put into action, because ultimately you go to your inspection provider and you make the change. Whereas, relocating manufacturing, this is a much larger project, but they're all cost-saving measures. So definitely very, very helpful there. That's good. There's going to be a lot of links in the show notes this week, because you've written about all of these topics probably multiple times on Sofeast and also your blog, qualityinspection.org. So I'll have a good trawl through and find as much related content as I can. So if you're listening and you want to go deeper, just dive into those links and get reading.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, well, thanks, Renaud, and thanks for listening. We'll be back next week.
Yep.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast, brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.